Okay, how's everybody doing today? It is October 4th at 3:47 p.m. in San Diego, California, year 2024. And today we had a little bit of a rally in Bitcoin's down just in the last hour, but it's up a little bit over 62,000. I think yesterday was 60,000. And obviously, I think it's going to go a lot higher. I think we're in a little bit of a time where it's in kind of in a lull, but it will go much higher, in my belief. So anyway, what I want to do today, I said I was going to do these daily, and I think I will, because I think we're in times where we do need to put content out every day because it changes that quickly. And if I look at the news today on Bitcoin, let's take a look at it real quickly. Oh, looks like they found out who Satoshi is. So a mystery creator of Bitcoin identified, new HBO claims document. I read through this. I think they're just shooting in the dark. They don't know who Satoshi is. They'll never know who Satoshi is. I don't think Satoshi is still alive. And I think the guy that they name, and I don't even know who it is, because I haven't seen the documentary, obviously, but I don't think that person's alive either. So I will not believe Satoshi's alive. I mean, I will not believe who Satoshi is until I see that million Bitcoin account moved. So they say there's some really early accounts moving some small amounts of Bitcoin in relationship to how much Satoshi actually owns. But until I see that Satoshi account opened up and moved, I won't believe that they've named Satoshi or will name Satoshi. That million Bitcoin is locked away, and it's a stable way for Bitcoin to not have too much fluctuation because a million of it's locked up. Now, if that ever did become available, yeah, now that's going to be a little bit worrisome, but it's not. It hasn't become available in all these years. I doubt that it ever will be. So until those accounts, that's what Vitalik says. Until he sees those accounts move around, there's like 20,000 accounts opened by Satoshi. Until one of those starts moving Bitcoin, I'm not going to believe that they know who Satoshi is, or if they have identified him, or if he is still alive. I believe he or she is not alive anymore. I think that person has long since deceased. So anyway, the main reason for this video today is I want to talk about this guy right here. His name is Milton Friedman. I know for a lot of people that are younger, they will not have no idea who this guy is, but this guy's a legend, and he speaks with authority. And he will tell you this is actually why the Great Depression, I mean, that's a long time for a lot of people that are younger, happened in the 1930s. But, I grew up with people that went through the Great Depression, my grandparents, and it made a huge impression on the country and on people at that time. And he explains to you what happened during the Great Depression. Everybody thinks it was on business success. Everybody was over speculating, over leveraged. That's what caused the Great Depression. No, what caused the Great Depression was the Federal Reserve. And while it never will happen again, he tells you, and I'm going to go through the clip so you can listen to it, what happened during the Great Depression and what's going to happen in the future. This guy's speaking from the past, but he's telling you what's going to happen now, today, and in the future, because he speaks with authority. So I'm going to, let me see, get this set up a little bit. I think it's loud enough for you to hear. Maybe make it just a little bit louder. And he's going to start off. I'm starting quite a ways into this because the first part of it's a banking conference, and they just talk about stuff that's not very important. But here we go. So I'm going to start right here with Milton Friedman, the legend Milton Friedman. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Check him out on Google. Here we go.
The facts were that from 1929 to 1933, the total quantity of money in the United States, the amount of currency, the amount of bank deposits, what Mr. Eccles referred to as M2, that total amount of money declined by 1/3. The total number of banks went down by 1/3. And why did the quantity of money decline? It declined because the Federal Reserve System failed to prevent the decline. The Federal Reserve System could have prevented the decline at all times. There never was a moment during that period when the Federal Reserve did not have the power to prevent the decline in the quantity of money. If it had prevented the decline in the quantity of money, you might still have had a recession, but it would have been a garden variety recession. It would have been over in the middle of 1930 or early in 31 at the latest.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. I don't want to play too long. But here, he's telling you, I grew up with the idea that the 1920s were like the Gilded Age and everybody was everybody's indulging. Stocks were overpriced. And that's why we had the Great Depression. And they blamed it on business. Business was over leveraged. That's why we had the Great Depression. That's what I always learned and heard. He says, no, it was set by monetary policy of the Federal Reserve. They contracted the money supply. They made the banks, they closed banks down. In fact, I think they closed, most of the state banks went out of business. My grandfather told me that. So if you had your money in a state bank, you lost your money. If it was in a federal bank, the money was protected, or they didn't go under as much, or maybe at all. I don't know. But at that point, I think that was one of the reasons they contracted the money supply, is to limit the number, to consolidate the number of banks. So there were fewer banks that were out there doing business, and they got rid of all the state banks. State banks were pretty much eliminated during the Great Depression, and you only had federal banks. That's what we have now is federal banks. I don't even know if we have credit unions, but I don't know if we have state chartered banks anymore. There used to be, but there isn't anymore. I'm not a banking expert, but I think that's true. The state banks went out of business during the Great Depression, so they consolidated the banking business into a few hands like they have today. I mean, you got Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase Manhattan, some of these banks. That's consolidated. A lot of that happened in the Great Depression. But it was the Federal Reserve did it, not business success that did it. It was still being manipulated back in the 1930s. And that's been, we're coming on 100 years ago when the Depression took place. 1932, 31, 32, 33, or 29 was the crash. It lasted all the way through the early 30s. We're coming on those days again, almost 100 years ago. So what happened during that time was the Federal Reserve contracted the money supply and closed banks. That made it so people had no money. So that caused the Great Depression. Now I'm going to move this thing up to 7 minutes, because he talks about he says, that's never going to happen again. I'm going to spare you all his rhetoric, but that's never going to happen again. And he goes into what is going to happen in the future. Why we will never have a depression again like we had in 1933 or 1929, crash, 33, 34, depression, or 20, 30, 31, 32, 33. And here's why he says we will never have it again. Here we go.
And facilitating a whole series of bank runs. So the Great Depression was not produced by a failure of business. On the contrary, it was produced by a failure of government, and a failure of government in an area in which responsibility had been assigned to government since the founding of this country. The Constitution of the United States. It gives Congress the power to coin money and set the value thereof. And it was in the management of this fundamental function of government that government failed and produced the Great Depression.
So that basically, the Great Depression was caused by government, not by business, not by speculation, not by an overpriced stock market, by government. That's basically the guy's talking. He's the authority. He's the guy that's been the legend. He's the economist that everybody looked to for so long. He's since deceased, but this is the guy, and he's telling you the way it was. It was the Federal Reserve that caused that Great Depression. Here we go. He's going to talk about the future.
We have learned from that failure. The Federal Reserve will not fail in the same way again. This time it will fail in a different way. This time
Notice it's all bankers that are laughing.
It has been failing, not by producing a Great Depression, but by producing an inflation.
That's what we're doing right now. Massive inflation. Trillions and trillions of dollars of inflation. Made a video yesterday of Elon Musk saying that the government's bankrupt. Can't pay their $34-35 trillion in borrowed money. So here we go. He's going to talk about how this is going to play out. This is what's happening today. He's talking about this. The video was posted 14 years ago. I have no idea when he made this talk. Could have been a long time ago.
Because just as you will hear the story that it was business that was responsible for the Depression, so you will today hear the story that it is labor and management that are responsible for inflation.
See, what are you hearing today? Labor and management is responsible for inflation. What's going on with the longshoremen? I think they did settle that strike. But they're blaming the longshoremen are going on strike, and they're going to say that's the reason we got this massive inflation. And although the strike didn't go on very long, or maybe they're going to say there's going to be repercussions because for a few days they shut down the ports on the East Coast all the way down to Texas, the Gulf Coast. So they're going to say that's the reason for the inflation, not the Federal Reserve, monetary policy, expansion. And they use all these terms that, these talking points like, oh, we're quantitative easing, or we're tightening. all the stuff that make you think they know what they're talking about. This is very simple. They're printing money. That's it. And that's what they're doing. And they're going to blame it on business. So here we go. He's going to say, labor, too expensive. The longshoremen, they want a 60%, 70, 80% raise over the next 6-7 years. And people are going to say, well, that's the reason we got all this inflation. Those longshoremen, they're going to get this huge contract. These guys are going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to unload boats. And that's why we got this inflation. He just said it. They're going to blame labor and management. So here we go.
It is the same kind of a myth. Inflation is made in one place and one place only, Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., the chief source, immediate source of inflation is a Greek temple on Constitution Avenue, which houses the Federal Reserve Board. An accomplice, and a major accomplice, of course, sits in the halls of Congress.
I'm going to speed it up here just a little bit.
More money on you. But on the other hand, it's been very unwilling to raise taxes. As a result, it has imposed inflation as a tax.
That's what I said yesterday. Inflation is a tax, and it's the most insidious tax there is because it penalizes the people that don't own things that are able to withstand the amount of depreciation that you're going to get through the inflation. So if you don't own a home, if you don't own some hard assets, Bitcoin, gold, stuff like that, you are going to get hurt by this harder than the people that do. Michael Saylor's not going to get hurt by this inflation or as much because he has a ton of Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin will outpace inflation, in my opinion. It has. I'm just saying this from historical fact. It will outpace. If you're somebody that is just living day to day and you don't have any resources, any assets, you are going to get destroyed by this inflation. It's going to ruin your lifestyle. It's going to put you on the street. And that's why we have so much homeless, because people cannot keep up with the cost of how things are continuing to increase in value. That's why your job seems so helpless. You seem so powerless at your job. You cannot trade your time for money anymore and keep up with the rate of inflation that we're at. And they're telling you this 2% rate inflation. That's a myth. That's a complete myth of government. That's just to keep you going to the next day, keep you at your job, keep you doing what you're doing. They're going to keep telling you, yeah, we're shooting for 2%, inflation, but it's not there. It's you're seeing it in your everyday lives. It's not the American dream where you're going to do better than your parents or better than your grandparents. No, you may make as much money, if not more, but it's not going to go as far.
That's one tax that you don't have to vote for, but you have to pay.
There you go. So yeah, it's going to be blamed on labor. It's going to be blamed on everything, but there's going to be massive inflation. We're going to have to deal with this probably for quite some time, and it's not going to be pretty. So like I made a video yesterday about the lifeboat. If you're on the Titanic, you get in a lifeboat. If you're in this economy, you need to get into something that's going to beat the inflation rate, which to me right now are things like gold, things like silver, things like Bitcoin. Hopefully that's the play. And if that's the case, you know what? You're going to get hurt, but probably not as bad. So anyway, don't have any comments today. Got 3 people watching. I appreciate it. I always like to end these with some sort of word of faith because I am a Christian. I do believe that whatever happens in this world, the better world, the next life is where the real play is. The next life is where we spend eternity. So I like to talk about that a little bit before I end this video. I heard something last night that was very interesting to me. A lot of people will not come out and say anything about their faith. In fact, during the presidential vice president debate, Tim Walz came out and he said something. He said something about what you do to the least of these, you do to me, or something like that. It's in Matthew. And he said, but I don't like to talk about my faith. So I don't like to talk about my faith, but I'm going to say this about the book of Matthew and about the fact that what you do to the least of these, you do it to me. Okay, that's nice, Tim. But the fact you come out and you say you don't want to talk about your faith, Jesus also says, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before the Father. So if you are a Christian, and a lot of people say they are, because I talk to a lot of people. I pass out Bible tracts every Thursday night down at the Oceanside Street Fair. If you want to see us, we're down there. We have a ministry down there. So if you deny Jesus to your friends, to your family, you don't speak of him, you don't talk, you don't introduce him to the people you know, he's not going to introduce you to the Father. So if you say you're a Christian, you should be introducing everybody you know. Like, here's my friend Jesus. I'm going to introduce you to Jesus. Here, he's my savior. I'm going to introduce you to him. And if you're embarrassed to do that and you're afraid to do that, then Jesus says he will not do it before the Father. So think about that. For all the people I talk to and all the people that say they're Christians, how many of them are out there talking about Jesus? How many say anything about Jesus in the course of a day? How many of them even say that they believe in Jesus in the course of a day? They don't. I don't have anybody come up to me and say, hey, I want to tell you about Jesus, even though I'm wearing a Christ hat, even though I've got a cross. I would love it if they did. I'd love them to come up to me and talk about Jesus. I would say, I see your faith. I see the fact that you are a true believer. You're someone that really does believe this because you talk about it and you talk about it in front of other people and you're not embarrassed of it. Like Tim Walz was embarrassed of it the other night when he says, I don't like to bring this up, but I want to talk about my faith. The only reason he wanted to talk about it because it was a point. They were talking about illegal immigration and he was talking about what you do to the least you do to me. It said that in the book of Matthew, but he was trying to do it to prove a point politically. Hey, we need to give these people that are coming across the border, treat them like human beings, which I agree. I'm completely in agreement with that. But don't say it in a backhanded way by saying, well, I don't like to really talk about this, but I will say this. But I'm in the debate and I want to make sure I get this in. And I want to make sure that, I try to disparage the Republicans as much as possible because they treat them like, Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump and Arnold Schwarzenegger are the same thing. But Donald Trump, thinking of animals and stuff like that. Yeah, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. So anyway, I leave you with that point. If you're a Christian, you should be not afraid to talk about Jesus or afraid to introduce Jesus to other people around you. And know that if you do that, Jesus will acknowledge you before the Father. I appreciate you watching. Thank you.